Hello. Thank you to Foothold for asking me to run this webinar today to talk about the We Care Dementia Care programme. My name is Dr Kellyn Lee. I'm a BPS Chartered Psychologist, so that's British Psychological Society, Chartered Psychologist. I'm also an academic, so I've worked in the field of, dementia research and ageing for the last 12 years. I've worked for organisations such as the University of Portsmouth. I did my PhD at the University of Southampton, and I've also done some work for the London School of Economics and Political Science. As well as being a psychologist and academic, I'm also the founder of Wiser Health and Social Care. Now, this is a spin-out company from the university in which we took my concept of material citizenship from an academic endeavour and turned it into a training programme for care homes. And I'm also the founder of the Dementia Care Hub. Now, this is a community group in which people that are still living at home, that are living with dementia, and their carers, they can come and get peer support and information, advice. And this is where we also run in person the We Care Dementia Care programme, which is what I'm going to talk about today. As I said, I've worked in academia and therapeutically for over sort of 11 years. And I've also worked in the field of health and social care for around 28 years. So I've been around for a while. So first of all, it's probably a good idea to look at what is dementia, because some people are unaware that dementia is the umbrella term for a group of diseases that impact the brain. So in relation to dementia, as I said, it's an umbrella term which covers deficits to the brain, which include loss of cognitive functioning. So these are things such as the ability to be able to recall memories, to be able to kind of reason, to be able to use executive functioning in order to make decisions about things, to such an extent in that it interferes with a person's daily activities and it interferes with how they live independently and how they live their lives. However, I would also like to make it clear that people with dementia can still maintain a good quality of life, can still make decisions for themselves, and can still engage in everyday activities for a long time. So, really it's a progressive disease which will get worse. It is life-limiting and it is a terminal illness. So when we're talking about dementia, we are talking about Alzheimer's disease, which is predominantly to do with lack of short-term memory. There's also Lewy body dementia, vascular dementia. We have frontal temporal dementia. Now, this one we hear people talking about a change of personality. So with this one, because of the parts of the brain that are affected by frontal temporal dementia, we can see changes in personality such as lowering of inhibitions, inappropriate behaviour, for example, saying things that other people might find inappropriate that the person wouldn't normally say, things like swearing a lot, stuff like that. Posterior cortical atrophy is another one which tends to affect more the eyes, so the vision, and the actual memory decline doesn't happen until quite a bit later. We have mixed dementia, and we also have Korsakoff's disease, which is an alcohol-related type of dementia. So such as a cancer, cancer is the umbrella term, but there are different types of cancer, the same as dementia. Dementia is the umbrella term, but there are different types of that disease. So if we look at the stages of dementia, some people talk about sort of 6 and 7 stages, and I don't think that's particularly helpful. And the reason I don't think it's particularly helpful is because what we can do is we can get stuck on what stage is somebody at. And actually people can fluctuate between stages. So I think it's much more helpful to look at this as 3 stages of dementia. And so the first stage is really the early stage. So when somebody is in the mild stage of dementia, and the effects of this are things like misplacing things and forgetfulness. It's difficulty with complex tasks or problem solving. So that's sequential type of action. Difficulty concentrating, short-term memory lapses, anxiety, mood changes, and food taste change. So quite often we see people that are living with dementia tend to start to get a really sweet tooth. So tend to start to like, really sweet foods, cakes, biscuits, that kind of stuff. And we have to also be really careful when we're talking about the mild stages of dementia, because dementia is a brain disease. So I may look at those effects and say, well, actually, I experience some of those some of the time. However, what I don't do is I'm not experiencing them on a regular basis. They are periods of that, as opposed to something that is becoming more pronounced in my everyday. We also have the middle stage of dementia, and this is what we call the moderate stage. So this is when we become more forgetful of, significant events in our lives that we would typically, think that somebody should remember, sort of that kind of personal history. We may become more moody and withdrawn, especially when we're looking at socially or mentally challenging situations. And this is no real surprise, because if our brain isn't functioning as it typically would, or it would for a person that doesn't have dementia, you have to work a lot harder. So therefore, in social situations, you are having to work harder to perform, your identity. So therefore, maybe feeling more moody or actually withdrawing from those situations can be seen. People at this stage may require support dressing. So they may not realise, which item goes with what, or I may see that I have a shirt and trousers and pants there, but I'm not quite sure which ones need to be put on first. Or equally, that cognitive functioning in which we, doing up a button, I know that there's a button here and I know that there's a hole there, but I'm not actually, that executive functioning in relation to being able to problem solve what you do with those things can start to become problematic. We also see incontinence in this stage, and this may well be doubly incontinent or just singularly incontinent, but that can become problematic. We can see changes in sleep patterns, so people may tend to start sleeping much more during the day and become more restless at night, but equally that becoming restless at night may lead on to that person becoming more sleepy during the day. And we also show an increased tendency to walk or become lost. So when I talk about walking, people used to call this wandering. Some people do still call it wandering, but we try and keep away from that kind of negative view of dementia. So just because somebody doesn't remember where they are going doesn't mean that they didn't start out on a path to go somewhere. Okay, and in the late stages of dementia, the more severe stages of dementia, this is where we tend to see people needing around-the-clock assistance. So this is where we see people needing more nursing care or certainly care support with their sort of, daily personal care, showering, washing, getting dressed, that kind of stuff. Lose awareness of recent experience as well as their surroundings. So some people can kind of feel lost in relation to not really knowing where they are. Experience changes in physical abilities. So this is where, when we're talking about dementia, it's not just about memory. It's the messages that go through the brain that tell the body what it needs to do. So walking, sitting, and eventually swallowing can become problematic because the brain isn't sending those messages, or those messages are being interrupted. People can also have difficulty communicating, so locating the words that they need in order to express how they are feeling and what they're thinking. And people in these late stages can become vulnerable to infections, so they can't fight the infections as well as they used to, and also become particularly susceptible to developing infections such as pneumonia. So I think to think about dementia in this way is much more useful to people, because also you can see how maybe in the mild to moderate stages people can fluctuate. So if somebody gets a urinary tract infection, or something along those lines that can impact thinking, we can see changes within that, but that doesn't mean that it's that significant change will stay, but sometimes it can. So in relation to dementia caregivers, There are around 850,000 people living with a dementia in the UK, and this is possibly underestimated because not everybody gets a diagnosis. Not everybody wants a diagnosis either, because in some ways the systems aren't always in place to support. There is still some stigma attached to a diagnosis of dementia, but of those that we know of, there are around 850,000 people. There are also around 670,000 unpaid carers in the UK. So this, we're talking more about family members. So we're talking about people that are husbands or wives, sons, daughters. And of these family carers, many of them are unprepared in relation to how to support a person with dementia. If they haven't been through that before, it's a very difficult process to go through. And equally, even if you have had a mother or a father or a grandma or granddad that had dementia, it still looks quite different if you are caring for a husband or a wife or a son or a daughter. Okay, so just because you have experienced dementia doesn't mean that you are prepared for it. So what we really need to start doing is we really need to start looking at how we can support these 670,000 unpaid carers in order for them to live well with the dementia, in order to support the person with dementia to also live well. So what we do know in relation to unpaid carers and family carers is that we have over 20 years of research, okay? And this tells us that caregiving, whilst it has some positive psychological effects, it also has a lot of negative effects. And these include high levels of stress. They include an increase in anxiety, more prevalent depression, and also burnout. So people that are caring for a person with dementia are a group of people that are much more likely to experience burnout than any other caring group because of the nature of dementia. Nearly 50% of caregivers feel carer burden. So this, and this isn't something that we should be ashamed of or something that we should, be worried about in relation to expressing that we feel, this kind of burden, because unless we acknowledge it and recognize it, it's very difficult to move forward. But this carer burden, we didn't ask for dementia to be brought into our lives, and it's not something that we necessarily wanted. So there's no surprise that people feel this kind of burden of then having to be put in a position in which they need to look after somebody. Family carers are central to the quality of life of their loved ones, and this is why I developed the We Care Dementia Care programme, because whilst we know that family carers are a significant and crucial part of a person's life, what we aren't doing particularly well is supporting them in order to be able to support that person. We also call family carers the invisible patients. So quite often when somebody goes into a GP surgery, for example, they have lots of needs that aren't being discussed because they're actually focusing on the person that is living with dementia. So it's that person that's ill, not me. I'm just kind of getting on with things. So dementia interrupts the life that we have. Okay, so it comes in and it interrupts the relationships that we have with that person, the routine that we have with that person. It also interrupts the sense of the life we expected to have. So this wasn't what I anticipated. This, whilst we know that we can get ill, and obviously we want to support family members if that happens. And as we age, we are more likely to experience ill health. It interrupts our relationships. Okay, so the relationship that we had, it's kind of interrupted that in a way that may not be able to be, I don't know it. The interruption causes this disbalance in the relationship. So the relationship that we knew, the relationship that we had, and the life that we expected to have is no longer what we anticipated it to be. And in that, there becomes this emotional reaction in relation to, you know, what is my life now? And we can tend to catastrophize in relation to running 100 steps ahead by saying, at some point, this person won't remember me. At some point, they're not going to remember our past. This isn't the future that I wanted to have with that person. But it can also bring families together. Okay, so it can be that because somebody has developed this illness, that actually people start working together, and that can be really helpful. But it can also cause a lot of friction amongst family members, because some people might not agree with the course of action that somebody needs to take, or you know, particularly around decision making in relation to long-term care, what that looks like. People have different ideas about what that constitutes. So this can also cause some friction between families. It can also be a case that as a family, you know, we didn't have a harmonious relationship to start off with, and now we're actually being brought together in order to make these big decisions that can actually be quite problematic. It's also a highly emotionally charged situation, because there is so much that, you know, is being brought up in relation to, you know, what's going to happen, how that's going to play out. So the We Care Dementia Care Programme is a programme that looks at that emotional content. It looks at how we can emotionally regulate, how we can notice what is going on for us as people, and how we can prepare families for that journey ahead. So when looking at carers' experiences, something that comes up quite a lot, particularly within our group, and also with other research that's been done, is that, you know, carers are told, well, we're worried about you. You know, so maybe family members will say, you know, to mum or dad, for example, you know, I know that mum or dad has dementia, but actually I'm worried about you. You know, you need to be able to take a break. You need to be able to do things for you. And what this can do at times is this can also make somebody feel that I'm not looking after myself well enough, but I don't know what that looks like. I don't know what to do about that. People are told to take time for themselves, but they don't always know, again, what that looks like. How do I take time for myself when actually I have to look after this person? How do I, you know, get some time alone when that person wants to be with me all of the time? There's also anticipatory grief, and this is huge in relation to dementia care. So anticipatory grief is that sense of loss, that huge sense of loss, that I'm losing the person even though they're sat with me. I'm losing the person even though they're there. And there's also social isolation and loneliness. So this can show up in different ways. It can show up in a way that people stop coming around because actually they feel uncomfortable. They feel awkward. They don't know what to say. They don't know what to do. So actually your world can become narrower because of that. And also the loneliness comes in because you can't have those, you know, you can't share your life with other people if they, you know, if they stop engaging with you. There is also a loneliness because actually there's the loss of the person that you are still living with. The loss of that person that, you know, the person is still there, but actually we don't engage in the same conversations anymore. We don't have that depth of conversation. They don't understand where I'm coming from, or I can't share how I feel with them. So this is something that, you know, so for example, the Dementia Care Hub, this is something that we try and plug that gap in relation to providing that support, reducing that isolation, reducing that loneliness that predominantly people living with dementia carers feel. There is also the carer's view, words that represent dementia. So I went on to a group that has over 2,000 family carers within that group. And I asked them to give me just one word that represents dementia for them. And these were the words that they came up with: loss, cruel, torture, scary, helplessness, confusion, no longer feeling safe, heartache, decline, and fear. So just by, you know, looking at those words, you know, they're pretty negative words and pretty frightening things to feel and to go through. And this again is why We need to really look at how we support carers of people that are living with dementia. Because yes, although there is a loss, there is that sense of loss of who we are and what we had, we can work around that. We can still live well with dementia for a long period of time. And what we can do is we can draw these thoughts and feelings out, and actually we can work around those. There are also feelings that show up for people that are carers of somebody with dementia, feelings that they don't necessarily always want to admit to because it makes them feel bad. You know, people will say to me, just the other week, somebody said to me, you know, oh, I just find my mum really difficult. And then I feel really awful for the fact that I've just said that. So there is this sense of negativity building on negativity. So these negative thoughts and feelings that we're having, and actually to say them out loud sounds negative as well. But actually what we need to do is we need to be able to kind of bring out these different feelings that we have. So what I see a lot of are people feeling angry, you know, angry that dementia has entered into their lives, angry that this isn't what they wanted, anger at the person because they are doing things that are causing them to feel angry. There can also be a lot of frustration with the services that, you know, are hard to navigate, frustration with, you know, somebody asking you the same question time and time again, and actually, you know, sometimes feeling really frustrated with that, frustrated at the sense of, you know, now I have to do so much more work on top of the work that I already do. There's also a sadness, you know, that carers often feel, you know, this sadness of life isn't how they wanted it to be, and sadness that the person isn't the person that, you know, they're changing in front of them. And actually that's a really hard thing to go through. Resentment that actually I'm doing all this work and you're not even acknowledging that I'm doing it. I do all this for you. You know, my social circle has become smaller and I resent you for that. Or, you know, I'm having to do a lot of the jobs that you used to do and you don't even notice, and I resent you for that. There's also a lot of guilt. A lot of carers feel guilt because, you know, they're having all of these feelings, and then they feel guilty for the fact that they're having these feelings, you know, because I love that person, and equally, you know, this is what I do, you know, I need to care for them, and you know, having these thoughts and having these feelings creates this real guilt complex, and actually all that guilt does is serve to make people feel even worse than they did. So guilt is something that we really need to work on. And also feelings of shame and embarrassment. So particularly, you know, the shame of, you know, embarrassment being, you know, I don't want to take the person out for lunch because they don't know what to do with a knife and fork anymore. And then I feel embarrassed about that. And then I kind of feel ashamed that I'm embarrassed about that. So all of these different feelings can conjure up all of these different emotions. And if we don't know what to do with those emotions, we can't live particularly well. So the We Care Dementia Care Programme is based on the principles of acceptance and commitment therapy. Okay, now acceptance and commitment therapy is an empirically based contextual cognitive behavioural therapy. So what it does really well, and this is why I think it works really well for carers of people that are living with dementia, is rather than saying, I need to change what I think, what ACT does is it acknowledges, it accepts what is going on. So I am feeling this and I am thinking this and I'm recognising that, I'm noticing that. Okay, and then the commitment part of it is, okay, so now I'm noticing it, what do I want to do about it? So rather than trying to get rid of it, what we do is we work through those emotions, we notice those emotions. So we support carers through acceptance and mindfulness, and we do that in order for people to be able to develop some strategies that can change, you know, by reducing the influence of fear and avoidance, of those difficult feelings and thoughts that they have. So what I mean by that is we develop strategies in noticing, you know, the lots and lots of techniques that we use so that we notice what is going on for us. We notice where in the body it's happening. We notice the thoughts that are going on within our heads. And then what we can do is we can stop and we can pause. Okay, and then we can go, right, okay, how do I want to be? How do I want to manage this? And then we can take a committed action to doing that. So, as I said, one of the main components of ACT is this acceptance of painful thoughts and feelings. It doesn't mean that we're not going to get rid of them. You know, they may well still be present, and actually they will possibly still keep coming round, but we can engage with them a little bit less. But actually, when we talk about acceptance, what many carers think acceptance is I just have to accept the way that things are. I just have to deal with it. You know, and particularly in the UK, we have this kind of idea that, you know, just take it on the chin, pull your socks up, stop whinging, get on with it. And actually what that is that's avoidance. So I'm avoiding what's going on for me. And actually what we need to do, which could make life a lot easier, is we can accept that we're having these painful thoughts and feelings, and we can explore them. So ACT teaches carers that rather than trying to avoid this stuff, rather than trying to get rid of it, you know, quite often I hear this sense of, oh, well, you know, I just need to be more positive. It is the way that it is. That doesn't work. Being more positive doesn't work. You know, actually what it does is, if you try and be positive and then you fail at being positive, then you kind of feel like, well, I'm failing in that as well. But actually what ACT teaches us, that instead of that, we can open up and we can make room for these painful feelings. We can make room for these sensations that are going on within our body. We can make room for the urges that we have, and we can make room for the emotion that is going on within us. Okay, and if we think about this, so if I give you an example of making room for something, an emotion. So if we think about emotion as a beach ball, and you're in a pool and you're pushing the beach ball into the water, and it pops back up, and then you push it back down again, and then it's popping back up, and you push it back down again, and it pops back up. Okay, so you can't keep it down, and actually the amount of energy it takes to keep that down, and actually even by holding it down, it means that you are less able to do other things because you're too busy holding this down. However, if we just let it pop up and we just let it be with us, you know, we hold it next to us, it doesn't take as much energy, and we're not trying to get rid of it, we're just allowing it to be there. This doesn't mean that we like the thoughts that we're having, and it doesn't mean that we want them to be there, and it doesn't mean that we enjoy the feelings that we are having, but actually resisting them, trying to run away from them, actually can make us feel more overwhelmed. It can make these thoughts and these feelings louder, and us more reactive to them. And what we can do is we can then become overwhelmed. And I see lots of carers becoming overwhelmed. So what I'm doing with ACT in relation to the We Care Dementia Care programme is it's acknowledging, it's accepting that these thoughts and these feelings are there. It's opening up and allowing them to be there. It's not resisting them or running away from them. It's investing our energy in the things and the people that really matter to us. So it's giving ourselves that space to think about those things. Who's important to me? What's important to me? Why is it important to me? And in doing so, this allows us to have a much better quality of life. Now, that doesn't mean that those external stresses, it doesn't mean that the dementia, for example, is going to go away. It doesn't mean that that person is going to start to, you know, do things differently. But actually, because we are doing things differently, we are much more in control of how we are reacting. Okay, so we are responding rather than reacting. Now that doesn't mean that it will, you know, you will be perfect. It doesn't mean that everything will run smoothly. It doesn't mean that you won't ever react or won't become overwhelmed again. But what we're working towards is that those feelings of being overwhelmed being less. You know, so those negative thoughts and feelings sticking around for less time. It doesn't mean they won't show up. It doesn't mean they won't be there, but it means that perhaps we can actually have them there for a less amount of time. So if we look at Lisa's story, so Lisa's mum has a dementia and she needed to move into a care home. But she'd always told mum that she would never put her in a care home, and mum had always said, please don't ever put me in a care home. But the situation had become such that actually mum did need 24/7 care, and Lisa had 2 small children. She couldn't actually navigate caring for mum and also caring for the kids and doing the school run. She also had a job, you know, she had a lot going on. So they made the decision that mum, you know, would go into a care home. They found a great care home for her, who were very receptive and very responsible and, you know, delivered really great care. But Lisa couldn't get away from these feelings of betrayal, you know, that she was betraying mum because she told her that she wouldn't ever put her in a care home. What we could see, so in relation to Lisa's behaviour, from these feelings of betrayal, what we could see, so if I was looking in on Lisa, the way that that would show itself is she couldn't stop crying. She, you know, she was constantly feeling overwhelmed. She was stressed. She couldn't think straight, you know, and the tears would just come frequently. And this was having an impact on her family, because obviously they were becoming upset because she was upset. She didn't have the tolerance that she wanted to have for them. She didn't have the time, the space in her head to think about her family. It also became problematic for her work because she worked in the field within the NHS. And so she was actually providing a caring role at work too. And she couldn't, you know, she couldn't manage, you know, the expectations of what she needed to do at work, as well as everything that was going on at home for her. And this was having a detrimental impact on her mental health. Lisa also had thoughts that she was a bad daughter, and she was really getting stuck in these thoughts that, you know, she should be doing this, she should have had mum at home, she should be doing more. And actually what we would talk about is, if there's a should, then we need to explore that, because actually a should is not a willingness. A should isn't something, you know, we can feel resentment for that should, and it also can conjure up a lot of these negative feelings that we feel. So what we did with the We Care Dementia Care programme is this enabled her to open up to these difficult thoughts and feelings that she was having. It enabled her to make room for them. Okay, so we could draw on those things, and we could talk about, okay, so what does this look like? What does it feel like? Where in the body are you feeling this? What are those thoughts that you are having? Okay, and also what we did is we identified her values, because the ACT programme, an ACT in itself, is a values-based, values-laden based methodology. So we look at the values because they are integral to us. They are who we are. It's what we stand for. Okay, so if we have a goal, it's not about the end result, it's about what we do in order to get there, the way that we behave. So if we're looking at, you know, values, what I needed for her to do is to identify those values. What was important to her? Who was important to her? What could she start doing more of that would make her feel good? And what could she do less of that makes her feel bad? So we started to kind of work through this, and what she found was there were, you know, love and care were 2 of her values. So what we looked, when we looked at this in relation to her mum, what we could do is we could say, well, actually the love and care is exactly the reason why you have, you know, moved mum into a care home, because you love her and you want her to live as well as she can, and you aren't able to do that with everything else that you have. You are doing this out of love. You are doing this out of care for your mum. So rather than these feelings of betrayal and feeling like a bad daughter, actually it's because you love her and because you care that you have made these difficult decisions in order to make sure that she is okay. So in relation to the Dementia, We Care Dementia Care programme, an overview of the course looks like this. So the course takes 7 weeks and it's 1 hour each week. And this can either be done in person or it can be done online. So in week 1, we introduce ourselves. Who are we? Why are we here? In week 2, we start to notice our thoughts and feelings. So journaling them, kind of starting to really home into what's going on for us. In week 3, we look at who and what are important to you. So this is where kind of the values-based stuff tends to come in. In week 4, we look at why we get stuck. Why do we get stuck on certain thoughts and feelings? In week 5, we start to look at self-compassion, because although we as a society, we kind of seem to think that we understand self-compassion, it actually is very difficult to work out what is it, how are we compassionate to ourselves. We may be able to offer compassion to other people, but typically as human beings, we don't tend to offer ourselves very much compassion. In week 6, we do a group practice session. So we start to bring all of this stuff together, and I do an exercise in relation to starting to map this out. And then in week 7, we look at how we use these tools in order to keep them going, so that this is a longer term thing. This isn't a quick fix. This is a way of practicing, a way of behaving that enables us to live as well as we possibly can while caring for a person who is living with dementia. So the We Care Dementia Care Programme, as I said, it's a 7-week training programme, 1 hour each week, online or in person, and it's for any person who is caring for a person who is living with dementia. The course costs £70 per person, so that's for the entire course and for the resources that you get. And within this programme, it helps carers to build that self-awareness, to understand those thoughts and feelings. It includes mindfulness. And when I talk about mindfulness, I'm not talking about the pop psychology that goes on, in which you go and sit out in the middle of a field and you just take in the whole environment. When I'm talking about mindfulness, it is about noticing those thoughts and feelings that we have. It's about understanding what is going on for us and what we'd like to do about it. It's about understanding what our values are. And actually, as particularly for me as a woman, and having children and work and all these kinds of things, sometimes we can lose sight of what our values are and what is important to us as a person, because we're quite busy caring for everybody else. It supports carers to notice thoughts and feelings and explore who and what are important to them, exploring external and internal barriers that increase levels of stress and anxiety. So external, such as the dementia or how people react to that dementia that are external to you, and also internal barriers. So, you know, really getting stuck on that, well, this is the way that it should be, or this is the way that I believed it should be. And actually we work through those, because they do increase levels of stress and anxiety, and they're the things that we get stuck on. We begin to understand the importance of acceptance and self-compassion, and also how to practice this. And it's like anything, you know, you don't become great at football if you never go to training. You don't get a six-pack if you don't do exercises, you know, and it's the same with the brain. The brain is a muscle, you know, it works a lot on automatic pilot, and that isn't always helpful for us. And just because something worked for us before doesn't mean it's going to work when we are caring for a person with dementia. So it's really looking at how do we practice these new techniques, and how do we start to make this part of our everyday so that these become more automatic to us. So it's practicing these new tools and these new techniques that are taught within this 7-week training program. And also what we do is I invite people to do a bit of homework. You know, each week there is something that we can do. Now, in some of the training programs that I run, people, you know, are too busy. You know, life is too busy to be able to do the homework, which is why I invite people to do it. I don't tell people to do it. But equally, even if they aren't actually physically writing things down, what I do see is that they're starting to notice what's going on for them. But we recap each week on what it is we've learned from the week before, and how maybe we've put that into practice. So if anybody would like any information on the We Care Dementia Care Programme, you can contact me on info@dementiacarehub.co.uk, or you can contact me on the number that's there. Or if you would like to book or visit, if you would like to book onto the training programme, you can visit our website, which is www.dementiacarehub.co.uk. And there's information on there about the course. There's also information on there about the community hub that we have, and other training programs that we run. So I hope that this has been useful. I hope it's shed some light in relation to where we can go in order to support people who are carers of people that are living with dementia. And yes, thank you Foothold for having me, and thank you for watching this video.